Hey, welcome back to the Barrel Proof Baseball Podcast. Today, I've got two very great guests that I'm really excited to. I'm excited to get this video posted. I've been sitting on it for a little while. Middle of season right now, so sometimes the time it takes to edit. We had a move. We've had a lot going on. We got a new dog. So just the time it takes to get this thing edited, get them out there. Obviously I'm a little bit behind, and I suck for that, but hopefully people check these out and they're still enjoying them. I got some more baseball conversations coming up in the near future. However, being that I am entrenched in baseball at the moment, it's really nice to be able to have some conversations about whiskey. And so I've really been pushing more whiskey conversations. So hope you understand. Today's guests, I have Laurelin Doty and Alan Bishop from Spirits of French Lick. Now, I had actually heard of Spirits of French Lick because I was listening to Steve Akeley on the ABV network, and they do a phenomenal job. I mean, I go on walks and listen to those guys, and they were just phenomenal. Jeremy, Renee, like those, they're awesome. I say it like I know them. I don't, but they're rad. I really like listening to them, and they always mention Spirits of French Lick and Alan Bishop. And so I looked into them. I thought they looked kind of cool, reached out, and they sent me, 5-6 little sample bottles of some different whiskeys, a couple bourbons, a couple absinthes, an apple brandy, and really excited to try these out. So I was stoked when I got to sit down and have a conversation with them. And when I talked with them, I had a full beard, not just a sweet mustache. We were living in our old house. So finally got things settled in, and now I get to post this. In our conversation, we try all these different samples that they had sent me, and I loved all of them. However, one of them stood out, and then we talk about it in the episode, and this is the Mattie Gladden. It's their high rye bourbon. This is incredible. I've had a lot of bottles sent to me. I've had a lot of samples sent to me. I will say, of the samples that I've been sent, the Mattie Gladden has been my favorite. I've definitely had some bottles sent to me that I've absolutely loved. They sent me a sample of this Mattie Gladden. When I tried it, I ordered it, within a couple of days after our conversation. Absolutely love this stuff. This is not a major brand that I think a lot of people are going to hear about, especially not if you're not in the area. If you're not out in that region, you're probably not going to hear a lot about Spirits of French Lick. You're not going to find it on the shelves. It's available on Sealbox. But I think this is one of those brands that as you look into, you realize that there's a lot of great whiskey out there. There's a lot of great brands out there. And there's some really great people that are involved in the making of these really good whiskeys. So this was an hour and a half long conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Like, I will say, I do believe that Alan Bishop may be one of the most interesting men in the world. I want to party with that guy. He is rad. So smart, so passionate about whiskey. I feel like the guy could tell stories. He knows his stuff, and he's going to rock out to some new age music, and I think he's going to probably have a good time. So I had a great time talking with Alan. Laurelin was awesome. She was so helpful, super knowledgeable. Her family is deeply involved in this brand. I mean, go to their website and you're going to see the last name Doty all over the website. It's a family, a lot of family involvement, and she was just super sweet, and I was really excited to have both of them on. So check this episode out. I think you're really going to enjoy it. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of knowledge getting thrown out there. And in addition to that, they make awesome whiskey. So check this out. Check out their website. See if you can get to Sealbox and order some of their whiskeys. They've got some absinthe, which I was freaked out to try just because of watching Euro Trip and the little green flying goblin guy or fairy or whatever it was. But it was really good. It's my first time with absinthe. Even though when I was in Prague, I was right next to an absinthe place, and I was too scared to try it out. So I was glad I tried it this time. It was incredible. Really excited about this one. Really excited to hopefully get some more of some bottles of Spirits of French Lick in my cabinet, because it's just terrific stuff. So check us out. Leave some comments below. Let me know if you guys have had any spirits of French lick. If you've not, I recommend it highly. So check the links below. Click on the Patreon if you want to help out. If you want to help support the channel, click on, there's bottomless coffee, walk-offs and whiskey. What else was there? Something else on there. Amazon store, but check those things out if you want to help support. If not, go buy some of these whiskeys. There's some great people involved. They're making really good stuff. Go support some craft distilleries. So that's all I got. Check this out. Enjoy. Cheers. All right, we're here with Laurelin Doty and Alan Bishop from the Spirits of French Lick. Guys, thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Yeah, no
Glad
problem.
to be here.
All right, tell me, well, now that you're full from your black bean burger, we have plenty of time. So tell me a little bit about yourselves, if you wouldn't mind, maybe outside of whiskey or pre-whiskey or pre-spirits in general. Yeah, Laurelin, you can start with you.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Southern Indiana. I'm from Chicago originally, but grew up in Southern Indiana. And I grew up in a kind of Baptist household. My parents gave housing to missionaries. And so it's kind of an interesting transition for me from that to what I'm doing now, which is I met Nick out of college. He's one of the owners of the French Lick Winery and distillery. And I spent several years right after we got married being a stay-at-home mom and raising our 3 kids, getting them into school anyway. And then as his parents started stepping down from the business and kind of retiring, I came on board to help him run the business. So I am so new to all of this, spirits, wine. I've really only been, kind of in it for like the last couple of years, but it's fascinating and I'm really enjoying it.
Nice.
But yeah.
Alan, how
she
about
enjoys
yourself?
it, and she enjoys it until I come to her and I'm like, there might be an issue.
Oh man,
That's like the words that you're frightened to hear.
Right. I'm always nervous to call him back if I missed his call, because I'm like, what did I do? What did I not do? What's going wrong up there? What do I need to fix?
Alan's calling it either 9:30 at night or 7:30 in the morning. Nothing good can come from this.
Right.
Neither way, it's a good thing. It's not a good call.
Either that, either it's something, I need to fix, or it's really good news. Like, the Lee Sinclair won double gold at the Denver International Spirits Competition. It's one of those two things.
That's a good call.
I'm gonna wear that medal like Flavor Flav in his clock for like a week, just around the building.
I think anytime you go on like a podcast or a call or anything like that, you should definitely have that on.
Oh yeah, for sure.
There's no reason not to.
I agree. So my background is kind of like equal and opposite to Laurelin, in that I grew up in a 5-gallon Baptist household. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but that's an old Southern thing, which means that basically you can drink and do whatever you want Monday through Saturday, as long as your ass is in church on Sunday. So, I grew up in a family of tobacco farmers and distillers, primarily from Kentucky, but via Indiana for the past couple generations. Southern Indiana, as we call it, Hoosier occupied northern Kentucky. And so I was always around distilling and spirits, and I guess I never really realized that it was weird to to be around illicit distillation until I was probably like 13 or 14, because it was just another thing that we did on the farm to pay taxes or, pay for Christmas or whatever. And I don't know how, my parents never got in trouble, because I'm sure that I had to mouth to people before, oh, we make whiskey, when I was a kid, because it sounded cool. But my original primary love in life was agriculture. Mostly, I wouldn't call it certified organic, but we called it ecologically grown. So when I was in my mid-20s, I converted the old tobacco farm into an organic agriculture farm. And then prior to that, when I was about 15, I got tangentially interested in distilling for the obvious reasons a teenager would be interested in distilling. And no judgment against my family, my dad and my grandfather in particular, but I think they always had the thing in their head that, like, he's going to go out in the world and find stuff anyways. If he's going to find it, he might as well find it here where we can watch him and make sure he doesn't do anything stupid. So started distilling of my own accord when I was 15 on a little 10-gallon pot still that they helped me build. It's actually built out of an old 10-gallon coffee dispenser from Fort Knox, of all places, stainless steel coffee dispenser. So sitting in the John Hay Museum up in Salem, Indiana now. Anyways, so when I got in my mid-20s, I was playing around with organic agriculture, and then agriculture and distillation are one and the same for me in a lot of ways. Distillation is just a continuation of agriculture. It's a way to you know, value added is a popular term in farmers markets. For once, it's not me with the dog. That's amazing.
I mean, unbelievable. Right. I had it on mute too. I thought I heard something, so I put it on mute, and now my dog's, you know, barking up a storm.
It's a little known skill that I have that I can actually translate dog. And what happened was the dog heard me talking and was like, this guy, full of shit. Just
he got all excited about it.
They know.
Had to call you out for it.
Yep. So long story short, prior to legal distilling, I was trying to make a living off of plant breeding as much as anything else, or selling produce on top of that. And at that time in the Ohio Valley, nobody cared. You know, you could go to the farmer's market every weekend, have, you know, what I would call value added food as far as, you know, high anthocyanin tomatoes, sweet corn, you know, high carotenoid sweet corn. Everybody and their brother here grows a garden, or did grow a garden, and you'd show up and think you're the first one in the market with something, and somebody would show up with a trunk full of whatever you were trying to sell and give it away for free. So, you know, at some point it just becomes a little too dangerous to sell things illicitly. And my wife sort of pushed me and said, my now wife at the time, girlfriend, you either get a job doing this legally or, you know, I'm out. So, yep.
I'm always kind of interested, because it seems like, you know, either people who start, you know, their own distilleries, or, you know, like you said, you're doing this your whole life, and like, how do you take that jump from doing something that you're enjoying to going, hey, I can make a career out of this? Like, how do you decide that this is something I can really do? I can dive into this and just like do it really well. How does that happen?
Well, it wasn't a jump, it was a push. That's what it was. It was, and not that I wasn't interested in getting a job distilling legally, but in Indiana at the time, so I started out at another distillery in Louisville, Kentucky for a couple of years before I got over here on the wrong side of the river, quote unquote, the north bank of the river. Really the push was not just her, but also, like, you know, I mean, you can get away with something for a long time if you're real careful about it, right? And if you grow up in a small town, you know everybody. You've been on the fire department. Your dad's been on the fire department. Your grandpa's been on the fire department. You know all the cops. But eventually, you can get a little too big for your britches, so to speak. So we had at one point in time, 150-gallon pot still in the backyard, and everybody knew we had it. But we would go to parties, and jars would come back around to me. And of course, this was like right at the time that Moonshiners was hitting big on TV and all that goofy shit too. So jars would come back to me, and people that I didn't know, who shouldn't know that I made it, were asking me to sign jars. And so at some point you have to rationalize, like, you know, you only really have one marketable skill in life. And so it's either this or dig ditches. So it's probably time to try to find something legally doing this.
Yeah. not keep running around and having jars, random jars heading your way.
Right. It's not gonna last forever, you know. And,
sure.
and I mean, it's a relatively, you know, not to encourage home distillation, but and I'll always advocate for legalization of home distillation, but it's not a particularly heavy charge within the state of Indiana, but it's enough that people will notice. Yeah. You know?
Sure. Kind of push them away from wanting to do it too much.
Right.
Laurelin, when I was looking on the website, I noticed that the Doty name seems to be all over the place. There's a lot of Doty family members, I'm assuming. How is that? What is the, like, who started it? You know, who's the we'll say who's in charge, more or less? Like, how does that line go?
Yeah, so John and Kim, my husband's parents, started the winery back in 1994, and it was actually all four of them. It was John, Kim, Nick, my husband, and his older brother Aaron. And I think Nick was 14 at the time, maybe. And he started out as the winemaker, making wine with John, and then he's really just done that the whole time. He's the head winemaker now. He has for a while. And so let's see. So they started the winery in 94. That grew pretty quickly. I think they did 500 gallons of wine their first year. And then last year, the year before last, we did 64,000 gallons of wine.
Wow.
So yeah, so it's grown quite a bit. Sweet wine is mostly what's distributed. We do some dry wines out of our vineyard that are tasting room only because we have a really small vineyard, not really big enough to distribute the wine that comes out of there. But we do sweet wine. We've got I think 11 or 12 of them, I want to say. It's really bad that I don't know that number right off, but so we're pretty widely distributed throughout Indiana and then into Kentucky, and we just got the wine into Mississippi as well. And in 2016 was when John decided, well, a couple of years before that, he did some research and stuff, but he came to us as the family and started talking about wanting to expand the business. And he was trying to decide between a brewery or a distillery. And so, he did a bunch of market research, sent Nick around to some conferences and stuff. And he eventually settled on distilling. That was just something that was the direction he ended up wanting to go with it. And so yeah, that was 2016 was when we started the distillery. And it was, Alan can talk to you about the products that we started with, but it was mostly white spirits and, stuff we could get out right away pretty much. But the goal was always to age, to lay stuff down, to age and eventually come out with older products. And that was what we were able to do last year with our bottled and bond release, which was pretty cool. But yeah, the Dotys are the owners and the ones who started the business.
Okay. Where's the vineyard at?
It's about 45 minutes away from the winery in Martin County, right? Oh, cool. Martin County? Yeah. Right outside of Lagodi. And it's just kind of way, way, way out in the country. So we don't do tours or anything out there. It's on Kim Doty's family farm. And we also grow some of our own grains out there as well. We've got wheat and corn. We kind of alternate growing out.
Very cool.
And I think, just a few varietals right now. We've had a lot of trouble with the vineyard actually the last few years. We had some drift from a local farmland come over and, pesticide drift kind of knocked out a bunch of the grape. And then it's been kind of a struggle to keep those going.
Is that, not to switch it completely to wine, but it is interesting. Like, is it common? Are vineyards common out there? It seems like there's a huge fluctuation in weather that would be difficult for grapes, like versus, California or something.
Yeah. There, when they first started the winery, there weren't a bunch of wineries in the state. And now there are, oh gosh, several hundred, I think.
Yeah, really?
There's a bunch.
I didn't know that.
I don't know how many of them have vineyards, but several of the ones all of the ones we're on the Indiana Uplands Wine Trail with, which is 9 wineries total. They all have vineyards. And 2 of them, Huber's and Oliver's, have quite substantial vineyards.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, too, and this ties back into distilling in the conversation as well, but Indiana was actually the home state of the first successful commercial winery in the United States.
Really?
Yeah. So the up in Switzerland County in Vevey, Indiana, Vevey, however you want to pronounce it. That was actually a Swiss colony that came through Kentucky and into Indiana to start a commercial winery. And they were incredibly successful before anywhere on the East Coast ever was. So Indiana definitely has a history of winemaking that just got lost with Prohibition.
That's nuts. It seems like it's everywhere. I had no idea it was that big out there. That's really cool.
Yeah. And you might know more about the, do you know about the AVA, Alan? Can you explain that at all?
Oh, the viticultural area sort of thing?
Yeah. Because that's a relatively new designation, isn't it, for us?
Yeah, it's not too terribly old, but the idea is that you're getting designations based on geology as well as geographic location. And so we're part of the Indiana uplands, which is sort of marked by a more temperate climate than most of the rest of the state, as well as sandstone and limestone in the soil, which brings some interesting characteristics to the forefront. I believe I may be wrong here, Laurelin. You can correct this if I am. I believe Traminette is our state grape, which is actually, ironically, that was originally a brandy grape.
Really?
Oh, interesting.
Yep.
Yeah. We make a nice semi-sweet white wine out of the Traminette. And all of the wineries on the Uplands Trail have their own kind of take on Traminette. I mean, they're all fairly similar, but yeah.
So you guys started. I'm assuming most distilleries start with clear spirits so they can turn them around quicker versus laying down their own whiskey and getting that out, or versus sourcing it from somewhere. Is that kind of the route you guys went?
It's kind of a twofold thing, and Indiana is a unique state because Indiana has this huge, long, super in-depth history of distilling going back to at least as early as 1806, if not a little earlier, but 1806 is the first provable distiller in Indiana, Southern Indiana anyways. So you kind of get it, you kind of see what happens is that as the history goes forward and Indiana becomes a very successful commercial distilling state. As a matter of fact, for decades, literally Illinois, Indiana, and Kentucky were all vying for the top distilling state in the United States. And it's amazing nowadays the people that Indiana was ever even part of that conversation. Unfortunately for us in Southern Indiana, the temperance movement was massive. It was very closely associated with the Knights of the Golden Circle, which later became the KKK. Those guys were firm believers in temperance and firm believers that alcohol was destroying the quote unquote white culture, for whatever that's worth or whatever that means. So for a long time after Prohibition, it was very hard to get Indiana talked into, as far as the legislature went, talked into letting us distill. And so when the conversation finally started getting serious around 2013, 2014, it was very much around this idea of farm distilleries, the idea that, distilling is, again, agricultural, but they were really using it as almost a crutch to back up whatever their morals were at the time. And what I mean by that is they would only allow winemakers and our brewers that had a license active for 3 years to start a distillery. The rationale behind that was that those guys had shown that they were responsible with alcohol, despite the fact that I could go buy a liquor license and start a bar or a liquor store at the same time. So what they were really saying, it's okay to sell everyone else's alcohol, just not your own.
Not yours.
Yeah. So the first few years of this Indiana farm distilling legislation, there were a lot of changes, and they happened very quickly, and they happened overnight. So the easiest route to market is obviously to source things. And being in Southern Indiana, MGP is, super obvious. So when I got the call to leave my former job and come over here to the right side of the river and start distilling at French Lick, initially, I knew I wanted to do a bunch of white spirits. You have to do a gin. You're not going to not do a gin. There's no way you're not, despite the fact there's 3,000 of them out there on every shelf. I wanted to do some aquavit, wanted to do some absinthe, wanted to do, white brandy, whatever. But I also had a really good source at the time. And at the time that we started in 2016, April 2016 is when we did our first distillation. The market for bulk product was pretty slim, but I was lucky enough to make a lot of good contacts in the industry. And I was able to come up with some barrels of bourbon from Wyoming. I can't say what distillery it was from, but there's like 2 in Wyoming, so it's pretty easy to figure out.
50-50, yeah.
Right. And the idea was that we were going to do some blending with other people's stuff and put it out as our own label. And so we bought, I think it was $100,000 worth of bourbon. And the day that it actually shipped to us and it came in the door, they had changed the laws in the state of Indiana that had allowed bottling someone else's product to disallowing it, to where anything that went into the bottle had to be 60% yours from start to finish, which means that now we're sitting on $100,000 worth of bourbon that we can't do anything with until we have bourbon ourselves. It's at least 2 years old, which was a fun conversation to have with the owner at the time.
Yeah,
without a doubt, but not much you can do about it. So, I mean, yeah, the goal was always, in a lot of ways, I mean, I think most distillers who are true to their art, they don't want to buy stuff from other people, but it's an easy route to market. But you have to be making white spirit, first of all, to pay for the light bill. Second of all, I think, and more importantly, a lot of times, I mean, if you have the money to start a multi-million-dollar distillery, you theoretically should have the money to keep it running for a couple of years before you have issues. So more importantly, I think, you know, with making white spirits, it's really to show people that you are distilling. You're not just, and I don't mean this in any negative connotation, you're not just a non-distiller producer that's bottling stuff, but you are actively distilling. You're actively pursuing the art. So we tried to be 50-50 and it blew up in our face is what happened.
Crazy. So you, okay. So then what? So you have $100,000 worth of whiskey sitting there, and do you hold on to that to start blending it in 2 years once you've got some straight bourbon?
Sit on it, cross your fingers, and hope that aquavit or absinthe catches on. That was really the business plan for about 2 years.
That was the official plan.
Yeah. I mean, it was never like officially discussed, like, oh, this sucks, you know.
Yeah.
But it was very much like, oh, I guess it is what it is. And thankfully, the Dotys, you know, with their business sense, you know, they already had the winery, they already had a restaurant. They didn't start this with nothing, you know. They had a backup, and that's lucky in a couple ways, you know. A, because of what happened, and then also B, because they may or may not have made the mistake of hiring a purist. So for me, you know, my family being originally from Kentucky, me being, you know, first generation Hoosier, I use that word proudly, regardless of what people in certain parts of St. Louis think of it. I wanted to play into the history of distilling in Southern Indiana. So I wanted everything that we did to be legitimate, double pot distilled, no chill filtration, as close to what comes off the still, as close to what I taste off the still as what you can possibly get. No liqueurs or anything like that. And I was lucky enough that they backed me on that play. And so the goal was always to treat this place. It's one of the reasons I came there, other than it being in Indiana and being in the right region of Indiana, is that when you walk in and you see the equipment, it has some levity to it. There's some firepower there. There's something that you can do with it. It's almost too big to be comfortable, and it's too small to be comfortable at the same time, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, definitely.
You have the opportunity to really push what a craft distillery can be with that. And so in my head from the get-go, it was always, can we sort of make this the craft distillery equivalent of Heaven Hill with bottled and bond products? Can we make this the distillery that, even though it's in an old Kimball piano factory, can we make this the distillery that other distillers want to come visit? So
what do you start with? What's first? Do you go straight to gin? Is that kind of your first thing that you get going?
So we were doing the actually, it's funny. We did aquavit first. And I originally came up with the aquavit thing because I had seen that was becoming a thing on the East Coast and West Coast. And it just never has had its time yet, but it will. It was getting there prior to COVID, slowly but surely. But for anybody who's not familiar with aquavit, it's a Scandinavian spirit that's a very close cousin to gin, but it's caraway, coriander, dill, and then a little juniper in the background sometimes. So we hit that first, then we hit absinthe, which I knew we had to do because previously I'd worked at Copper and Kings and had developed all of their absinthe products. So kind of competing with myself, I wanted to see if I could make something different.
Do something better.
Right.
Yeah.
And better, in my opinion, anyways. Vodka was always, you know, I mean, it's easy, it's cheap, distillers don't get crazy excited talking about vodka because to us it had the potential to be good whiskey, but you took it too far. So, yeah, that was pretty much, I mean, very much a ready, fire, aim philosophy. So throw everything at the wall, see what sticks, and if something does well, then head in that direction. And we had some good success early on. We had a lot of attention on that absinthe that won several medals. You know, early on, I think with any distiller, competitions are important until about year 4 or 5. People start taking it a little more seriously. The gin, which came after the aquavit and the absinthe, ironically, and very reluctantly, we won double gold at ADI, best of class, best of category. So it definitely got some attention. I don't know that it sold a whole lot, to be honest with you, but certainly it put us in people's minds and on the radar.
What is your is there an enjoyment, again, not to say you don't enjoy it, but is there like an enjoyment level that's different with, you know, making whiskey or blending whiskey versus like a gin or a vodka? Like you said, people don't really get excited about vodka. Like is there with the gin or absinthe, is that as enjoyable as whiskey?
It is, and in some ways for me it's actually a little more enjoyable because really? I don't typically enjoy botanical spirits as far as something to sit down and drink. So they're a little challenging to me. But I think that's also an advantage too, because I don't become terribly overly critical of them in the way I do some of the other things. So as far as distilling goes, they're actually a lot more fun to do. Brandies to me are by far the most challenging thing. And it's a thing that I really enjoy making more than anything else is brandy. Yeah, I mean, I enjoy all of it. I like all the art, and the more odd that something is, the more I think I enjoy it. The more off the beaten path and the more challenging it can be, I think the more I want to do it. Vodka, by the U.S. standard, neutral grain spirit, essentially is the single most boring thing. It is literally just 18 hours on a hybrid pot still of just watching water boil is what it is. It's just miserable. There's nothing positive to say.
Laurelin, what's your drink? What is your go-to that you like in the line that you guys have?
Yeah, well, I really enjoy a dry red wine. But I have recently, in the last year and a half or 2 years, started getting into the spirits. And our rum actually was the first one that I got into. I tried it. I don't remember why. I think we were at a campfire or something, and we happened to have a couple of bottles of just some random stuff. And somebody had put it in the fridge, and or it was winter or something. I don't know. It was cold. Anyway, I tried it, and I just fell in love with it. And I might have gotten into a little trouble that night, drinking a little too much of it, but it was good stuff. Yeah. So then that got me interested in trying rums, and since then I've gotten more into the whiskeys, and right now I'm really enjoying the Lee Sinclair, the Iconoclast actually, which is a 3-barrel blend of our Lee Sinclair 3 barrels that didn't make it into the last bulk bottling that we did. But that one's just a nice, easy drinking.
So, okay. So I want to taste these. I want to talk about each of these, but I'm more curious about the absinthe. And I guess the reason is because I've never had it. Okay. I think when I think of absinthe, I think of like seeing the little green guy, like in Euro Trip.
Right.
2 years ago, we were in Prague, and we were right across the alley from an absinthe place, and I was scared to death to go in there and try it out. Kind of wish I would have tried it, but I never did. I think the green guy freaked me out a little bit, but I don't think we're gonna have that. But talk to me a little bit about like absinthe. How do you make it? What is it like? You know, how is it different than other spirits?
Yeah, so the history of absinthe is incredibly complex if you go back far enough. So it probably originally started off as some sort of tincture or elixir in some raw shape or form, just raw botanicals into raw spirit from Salerno, Italy. passed down through folk traditions, different magic traditions, different herbal traditions into cuvee in Switzerland. And a lot of people think of absinthe as being particularly French, but it's actually the Swiss who created it. So in the Swiss Alps, it became incredibly popular. Probably 1740s, 1750s is really when people started advertising it. It had always been a little bit of an underground kind of tincture, based upon different alpine medicinal elements that you had on hand: wormwood, grand wormwood, teat wormwood, all sorts of botanicals that grow in that region, anise, fennel, etc. So
is the fennel that like black licorice
yeah,
scent you get?
Fennel and anise in particular both have that kind of black licorice sort of connotation to them.
Okay.
Star anise does too, and that comes a little later on in the story. So absinthe by the Belle Epoque has become an incredibly popular drink. It's been adopted in France. In the Swiss Alps, they were actually making a clear absinthe, which is what we make, a Le Bleu style. Le Bleu referring to the reflection of the sky, being colorless, basically. Once it reaches France, it becomes more of a Verde style, a green, the green fairy, that whole connotation comes about, becomes very popular during the Belle Epoque, because what happened was the grape crops in France failed due to phylloxera, which was a root damaging insect or pest that came over from the Americas. And in those days, in the 1880s, or even before that, they basically had the equivalent of happy hour. But they did it with wine. And so once the wine gets wiped out, they need a replacement. So absinthe is always originally sold as like extract the absinthe. It's an extract. It's meant to be watered down. You're meant to add water to it, loosh it, have it turn a little white color. You also typically add sugar to it. And because of that, that makes it a little more on the sweet sort of side. You get what's called a gustatory illusion. Your brain actually senses food as opposed to alcohol when you're drinking absinthe. So it was an easy jump for wine drinkers to go over to absinthe. At the end of that period, once the phylloxera problem was kind of figured out, the wine industry had a very big issue. And that was that absinthe had completely displaced wine drinking in France and most of the rest of the world. And so what the wine industry in France did is they started to villainize absinthe by saying that it would cause you to have hallucinations. And they based this on alpha-thujone, which is in grand wormwood, which at high enough dosages does cause seizures, but ironically not hallucinations.
I can see the green fairy.
Right, exactly. So they came up, every horror story they could come up with, they did. So they found this one particular gentleman in the Swiss Alps who had drank absinthe and killed his family, killed his wife and his kids. And they said that absinthe would make you crazy and it would make you insane. You'd have hallucinations. And very late in the absinthe game, there were poor quality imitations of absinthe, essentially, where they were using things like copper sulfate to color the absinthe, things that would cause legitimate nervous issues. So it's pretty easy to villainize. And once one domino fell, they all fell. So there were actually absinthe distillers in the United States. The first one that we know of was ironically here in Indiana. And I'm sure there were some earlier than this, but in 1835, there were 2 absinthe distilleries in Switzerland County. Ironically, back to the Catawba thing. So those people were from Cuvée, Switzerland, of all places, the place where absinthe was born. They were large enough producers. They were shipping product downriver to New Orleans at that time. And I always thought that I would be the first producer of absinthe in Indiana until I found that story. And I was like, well, I only missed that by 100 and something plus years.
Second.
Yeah, right. So what we wanted to do is, absinthe, unfortunately, has had 2 bad turns. The first bad turn was the original ban. The second bad turn was after some illegitimate absinthes came on the markets in the early 2000s, mostly out of old Eastern Soviet bloc countries. They were colored with artificial coloring. They were essentially, for all intents and purposes, neutral grain spirit with some essential oils or additives added to it. And so people got this taste of absinthe in the mid 2000s when it still had the mystery in the air around it, and they got really turned off to it. Luckily, we had some good producers like Ted Bro of Jade Liquors, who does some excellent stuff if you ever get a hold of it. But the one thing that we've never had in the United States in modern times, as far as absinthe goes, is a true American absinthe movement in the way that we had with gin. You know, we threw all the rule books out regarding gin and did our own American version of things, you know, supersized as it were. And so that's what we wanted to do with absinthe. So we basically, with the LeBleu, we took a neutral grain spirit. We used a combination of recipes from both Cuvée as well as France, and blended those different botanicals together and then put our own American spin on it. A little later on, we actually took that same absinthe and dropped it into a new American oak number 2 char barrel, the same as what we use for our bourbon. And we did that essentially because I'd never heard of anybody putting absinthe in a new American oak barrel. So absinthe drinkers don't typically drink bourbon. Bourbon drinkers don't typically drink absinthe. And this was the perfect way to kind of bring those two sides.
Nice intro.
It's delicious.
I was like trying to look at, I was looking at this going like, it looks like, I mean, it sounds like a bad way. It could be tequila for God's sakes, but you know, like obviously, or if you're aging absinthe in a barrel, like you would, you know, whiskey. I mean, it seems kind of interesting.
It is a very, again, Americanized absinthe. I think that probably some of my traditionalist underground absinthe friends would call it a bastardization, but you can't put that on the label because TTB frowns on it. So
they don't like that.
Yeah. So what we did is we used the name Fascination Street. I'm a huge fan of The Cure. I love new wave music, and that particular Cure song worked out perfect for that. My buddy Mark Williams from Barrel House Distillery did the artwork on the background. I don't know if you can see it there.
That's cool.
But he laid all that out, and then we did a little Dan Aykroyd tribute. We filtered through amethyst, not for any particular reason other than to say that we filtered through amethyst, and it seemed kind of like a nice little mystical absinthe, you know, smart ass little joke to the inside. So,
all right. So which one of these do I try?
Easy drinking.
Which one do I need to try first? Do I go to the LeBleu or do I go to the Sinclair? No, I'm sorry, the Fascination Street.
So what I would do, and now we're doing this a little bit backwards. So typically we would taste absinthe at the very end.
Also, we can switch it. We can go bourbon for sure. Whatever you recommend.
Yeah. And the people just have to jump around. I would start with bourbon first because that absinthe is going to blow your palate. For sure.
All right. So tell me,
you're gonna be like, why does all your bourbon taste like licorice? What the hell?
Stuff is really weird. It's all black licorice. Okay, so I've got the Mattie Gladden, the bottled and bond, and then the Sinclair bottled and bond.
I would start with the Sinclair in particular. I think that's probably the intro bourbon of all the bourbons we do. So
these are bottled and bond. Are they at 4 years or past 4 years?
Yeah, so these are a little bit over 4 years, maybe 4 years and a couple months in a lot of cases, depending on which of the two bottled and bond Sinclairs you got. It could be right at 4 years or right at like 4 years and 3 months. So so everything we do is based on history, as I've kind of alluded to with all my geekdom that I have going on here. So Sinclair was a local businessman, originally from Greene County, Indiana. He came to Washington County, Indiana, was the son of a prominent mercantile mill owner who owned a huge mill up in Chicago. Sinclair started his own in Washington County, was very successful with that, became the owner of the New Albany and Salem State Bank, and got interested in the hotel business over at French Lick in West Baden, what's now called Springs Valley. It's always sort of had this kind of mysticism to it, with the groundwater having specific minerals in it that are supposed to be good for you, etc. So there's always been sort of a hotel resort element to this small, strange kind of dark town in southern Indiana. So he buys a hotel there that was called the Mile Lick in West Baden. He runs it for a couple of years. It burns down. He's going to get out of the business. He's done with it. The one thing that he loved more than business was his daughter, Lillian Sinclair, who absolutely adored the hotel resort business. She talks him into building a new hotel. He is descended from the Sinclairs of Scottish fame. He's been all over Europe in his life. He's been very closely tied to the Freemasons, etc. He has a little bit of occult worldly knowledge, as it were, and he decides that if he's going to do this, he's going to do it right. He's going to build the world's first fireproof hotel, and on top of that, he's going to build the world's largest freestanding dome. which existed as the world's largest freestanding dome for 70 years until the Superdome was built. It still exists today. And he's going to call it the Carlsbad of America and put in a casino, whether or not the law lets him legally do it or not. He's successful in all those things. And so we're located on Sinclair Street across from the West Baden Dome and Hotel. I'm from the same county as Mr. Sinclair and go to the same county to work as what he did. So it made a lot of sense to name something after him. So this is a very different mash bill from anything that you're going to find in Kentucky or Indiana. It's 60% corn, 17 wheat, 13% oats, and 10% caramel malt. So this was the first mash bill I came up with of my own accord when I was 15. My dad and my grandpa turned me loose at the still and basically told me not to blow myself up and bring them something that was worth drinking. And I knew all the things that they had taught me. But, you know, being a 15-year-old rebellious kid, I wanted to try something different. So I knew that oats were a grain. I didn't know they'd ever been used in whiskey before, but hell, it's a grain. Let's throw it in there. Let's see what it does. And so I threw the oats in and figured out that they add a lot of mouthfeel, a lot of creaminess to the product in particular, a lot of sweetness. They distill very much like they taste when you cook oats. And they're very pleasant. They actually give a little bit of a brandy-like sort of flavor and mouthfeel to the whiskey in particular. And then years later, doing some historical research, I found out that oats were incredibly common in Kentucky and Indiana whiskeys both, that oats were actually the number 2 crop in Indiana and Kentucky all throughout the 1800s. So not the first one on base there. Oh, got the baseball.
Why is it? I got you. No, I picked that up. Why is it not used more often? I mean, is there a price to it that's different than like a malted barley or wheat or something like that?
Right. So the big issue is that with oats, they're very hard on column still distillation. So what we focus on is pot still. It's all batches, 1,200 gallons at a time on stripping still, versus continuous distillation where you can feed 200 gallons a minute into a continuous column still. The problem is that the oats will clog up the continuous column still because they're sticky and they want to hang out together. There have been a few larger distillers that have played with oats in small projects. I think Jim Beam did one a few years ago, but you don't see it often just because it's such a pain in the ass. And then it's also a little bit outside of this, what we think of as modern Kentucky bourbon, right? So we all have this idea of, the 6 or 7 big guys that stuck around after Prohibition, after industrialization, and they're making either, a high rye bourbon or a wheated bourbon or a rye whiskey. And so it's just a little bit off kilter from what people expect of bourbon. Although in the grand scheme of things, especially if you were to go back in time, 1850s, 1860s, that spectrum of what we imagine bourbon to be was a lot wider back then. And I think that's starting to come back around, luckily, in general. But that's the main reason you don't see them. They're just a pain in the ass to work with.
Does it require more maintenance with the equipment and everything like that because how they stick and everything?
To some extent, it's not that bad with pot still distillation, typically because we have agitation in the still, etc. But what they would run into with the still actually is a little bit dangerous as far as the larger distillers go, because they would actually be clogging up the feed between the individual plates and building pressure in the still, which is a big no-no. They can be a little finicky when it comes to moving them out of the fermentation vessel into the still. It takes a lot of practicing with the water hose and a lot of cursing to get them to go where you want them to go.
That helps most things I've found.
Yeah, that and a ball peen hammer.
Yeah.
Those are the 2 tricks to life.
Yes, they really are. They need to be around more often, I think. It's interesting that for some reason, I always find a lot of bourbons, like just how they sit in the back of your throat, like they burn back here, like you get that feel back in here at the finish. I felt all that up front. It was very different.
Yes.
But I really dig the way that, like I said, that mouthfeel was really cool. Really like that one.
Yeah. Our motto is respect the grain. And so the idea behind that is that everything we do, we approach from a very brandy maker like pose, I guess. So it's very much a matter of blend and balance. So 50% raw material fermentation and distillation, 50% maturation. So a lot of what you're tasting here is very much so the idea that there are positive aspects of the grain that you can pull off. and then balance those with the barrel so that the barrel doesn't become overwhelming. Because, you know, if you're going to say, for example, that a bourbon has wheat in it, right? If it's 10 or 12 years old, you should still be able to taste those positive aspects of the wheat. And a lot of times in commercial bourbons, you miss that. So this is very much about blending and balancing those two ideas together and trying to hold on to all those positive aspects of the grain. And then that creamy mouthfeel, I'm a huge fan of the texture of whiskey. I mean, a whiskey can have a beautiful aroma, it can have a beautiful taste, but if it doesn't have something that just sort of sustains me while I'm drinking it, it's not worthwhile a lot of times.
Like the super thin ones that just go away really quick.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not a fan of that at all.
No. Laurelin, which one are you going with? Do you have the Sinclair?
Yes. Yeah. I've got the Sinclair here.
Yeah. That's a good one. I like that one.
Yeah.
That might, do you, well, I was going to get to this later, but do you guys sell online or is that not possible?
Yeah, we can't direct ship spirits. We can only direct ship our wine.
Oh, okay.
And but we go through Seal Box for kind of our direct shipping. And I think a couple of the products that he carries are linked from our website, so you can cool. Click the buy button and it takes you to his website.
Okay, all right. I was going to ask that later, but now that I thought about it.
Yeah.
All right, the Mattie Gladden, you got the high rye. So what is this one? What kind of rye content are we looking at?
Yeah, so this is another one of those really kind of alternative mash bills. So everybody sort of argues on the internet nowadays about what high rye means. So you'll see people say anything over 20% is high rye. So for us, that's almost like a challenge, like, 20% is high rye, let's go 35. Why wouldn't we? So 55 corn, 35 rye, 10 Victory malt. We do, and that's something I should have mentioned about Lee Sinclair too. We do use a lot of brewer's malts in particular, because brewer's malts have so much more flavor to them than distiller's malts. They're roasted to different degrees. You can pull off caramels and chocolates and all kinds of crazy stuff. So you'll typically see an alternative malt in pretty much everything that we make. So this is a pretty alternative mash bill in general. I do believe that Four Roses has one mash bill that's very close to that in particular. But it's not something you're going to see very often with that 35 rye, and it's entirely different.
This is really good.
Yeah. See,
that's really good.
That's the fun of this one in particular for me, because when we first started, we came out with a 2-year-old Lee Sinclair, which of course is a modified wheated, and then we did a blended, what we called the Wheater, which was 2-year R wheated bourbon and 7-year purchased bourbon that we talked about earlier. And everybody was like, well, when are you going to do a high rye? And I'm like, don't worry, it's coming. Just give me time to get there. I've got something for you guys too. And so this one's been a lot of fun for me. That one is a lot of spice on there. There's actually, ironically, a little bit of anise characters there. There's a lot of black cherry,
cocoa too.
Yes, definitely.
Like it's weird because like I haven't had very many rise or bourbons for that matter where I get that chocolatey type of flavor. And when people say, "Oh, there's a dark chocolate to it," or milk chocolate, whatever, like I typically don't pick that up. I don't know why. I love dark chocolate, but I never seem to get that. And I don't know if it's because like I'm good with a high, cocoa content in a dark chocolate. And so it's like, if it's muted a little bit in the whiskey, I don't necessarily get that. But this definitely has it. I kind of dig this a lot.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. And that one's been one that we've had fun playing with in the past too. We did a limited release of what we called Unpretentious, which was that mash bill aged for 2.5 years in a new oak barrel. And then we aged it for another year in a port barrel. Which did really well for us. But that one gets me in trouble. I'm not allowed to bring that one home anymore because I'm going to miss a day of work if I bring that home.
I can understand that, because I feel like this is, she seems very nice and you can spend a lot of time together.
Right.
She's quite lovely.
She really is.
There's an earthy quality to that one that I really like. And I know Alan laughs about this, but it reminds me of being out in the woods in the spring. Like, I don't know, just the new earth kind of smell and the rain and stuff. But yeah, I like that one a lot.
That one. So I haven't been on a rye kick really until kind of recently. And I think I think for me, it was because my very first experience with rye was not very good. I just tried it and I didn't like it. Really liked the bourbon. And I think it was a specific bottle that I had. I just didn't like it. And then somebody said, well, try Rittenhouse, which was, like a 51% rye, so it's like barely over that bourbon threshold of becoming a rye. And I was like, okay, I really like that. And then started trying some more higher ryes, or like an actual rye whiskey. And I really like them. I don't know that they have like necessarily the complexity as some of the bourbons do, that you're picking up different flavors, but like the good ones, I feel like it is probably more complex than some of the bourbons that are out there.
I agree. And I think you're going to see a lot more come into play with that in the next few years as people play around with different heirloom ryes and different mash bills, because up to this point, everything's either been that fairly legal Kentucky rye or it's been MGP at 95%. And there's a lot of play in between.
Yeah, lots.
So,
I mean, it seems like
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just saying, like you said, that leaves a wide variety of things. And even adding like a fourth grain in there could probably, I would imagine, do a lot for that flavor profile.
It does. We've actually got a rye whiskey that's based on the old George Washington mash bill. So it's 60% rye that'll be out this fall at 5 years old. And then there is another version of Lee Sinclair called Lillian, named after his daughter, that we just started putting down last year. And so it's the same mash bill, but we switch out the wheat for rye, and then we switch out the caramel malt for some honey malt. So that one's going to be
that's that Mattie Gladden's good. I see why you get in trouble.
Yeah.
I understand that. Yeah, I like that. All right, so we got the two absinthe, and then I got the Old Clifty apple brandy.
So you got a little bit of everything. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, this is a good mix right here.
Yes. So for those who are interested in the Mattie Gladden story, which is a hell of a story, you guys can check that out on YouTube via Spirits of French Lake. Bo Cumberland did a couple of videos. Long and short of it, named after a owner of a brothel in Salem, Indiana, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Married 5 times, twice the same man who she also shot in the face. Nice. So hell of a story. If you're going to name a bourbon after a woman, make sure it's one that can go toe to toe with any man of the time, for sure.
Right, like an absolute badass,
Yeah, exactly.
100%.
Yeah, and we're looking at playing off of the baseball thing too. That was something I mentioned. I meant to mention earlier. So you may or may not know this, but French Lick was actually the training ground for the White Sox.
Really,
years and years and years, and then also a lot of the smaller leagues, especially the African American leagues.
Really,
French Lick and West Baden was training grounds. So
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah. There's a ton of history right down there next to the dome and resort.
Alan, are you naturally a history guy? Because I feel like you're on top of like dates and names and stuff, and most people that are in history can pull up dates and names and stuff and put them together. It's fascinating.
I always tell people that, like, if you can find a crossroads where history, music, distillation, and agriculture come together, I'd probably be there selling my soul. That's probably where I'd be at, more than likely. Yeah. So
it makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's the stuff that I enjoy, and that's a big part of it. For me, distilling isn't just it's not just a job, it's not just a career. There's a little heritage and spiritualism that ties into the whole thing as well. So
yeah, I think that's one of the fun parts with bourbons. And I mean, obviously there's a lot of folklore out there. However, when you've got the stories that back up, and again, I don't care if it's Sinclair or if it's Elijah Craig, like there's a story, and regardless of there's some historical significance there either way you look at it.
I agree. And I think two of the biggest mistakes that most distillers make nowadays is they either lie about their history or they fudge the truth just enough. That's the one thing that we don't do. Everything that, like, if you read the back of our labels, everything that's on there is something that can be verified. We want that to be. We want you to identify these products with those people, and bring those people back around for everybody. So.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense.
And like you mentioned the other day that talking about Mattie Gladden and putting her on a product has kind of reignited local interest in her as a historical figure, right?
Right. Yeah. It's like sounds geeky, but I'm geeky anyway. So it's almost like a form of necromancy, right? So like nobody in New Orleans and North Carolina knew who the hell Lee Sinclair or Mattie Gladden was a year ago, but now they do, and now they're saying their names. You know, and it brings them back around in a certain way, and makes you look at. We have this thing that in Southern Indiana that I call Hoosier self-hatred, which is this idea that if you're from Indiana, nothing good could ever possibly happen here, and nothing good has ever happened here. It's because you don't realize what's actually around you and the heritage that you have. And so I like to play into that to some extent, you know, and it doesn't, I guess in some ways it could matter less to me whether or not somebody from Indiana actually realizes how important that is if people from other places realize how important it is, and it draws them to it.
But I mean, I think also, if you see Mattie Gladden on a bottle, your first thought is, who's Mattie Gladden? Right. And so I think a lot of people at that point, they want to, you know, jump on Google and type it in, and all of a sudden it's a cool story of, oh, you should hear about, you know, this Mattie Gladden person. And again, it's something, it's something cool. It's something to draw a connection to, you know, a community or like whoever. I think it's awesome.
And that's what we want. We want complete, you know, involvement in it. You know, if somebody sits down and reads a story and takes a drink of it, and maybe they identify a little bit with whatever, you know, Mattie's thing was back in the day. And, you know, you can jump on Spotify. Every product we have actually has a playlist that I've curated that has kind of influenced the distillation. So you can sit down, you can read the story, pour a glass, and listen to music that inspired it all in one go, and make it an all-encompassing, you know, thing.
So basically you just kind of created those crossroads yourself of history and distilling and music. Basically.
Nobody else is doing
it. The hard part for me is like, I feel like I could, like you, grab that Mattie Gladden and put on that Spotify playlist and find myself in trouble, because I feel like a playlist is going to be pretty good.
That one's particularly, there's a lot of new wave stuff on that one, ironically, but what I try to do is sort of approach it from like, if she were alive, right, what would she be playing at the brothel? And I thought, this kind of works, kind of dark and broody, and, you know, like nice. Deftones Passenger sort of thing would be, you know, more modern, but that sort of thing. So
okay, all right. So what are we going to next?
All right, so let's do Old Cliffy, the apple brandy. So that's
and I'll tell you this too. I've not gotten into brandy either. I'm the worst drinker in the world.
Well, I will tell you that I'm a firm believer, and have been for many years. Everybody talks about bourbon and they talk about what's next. Of course, rye is the easiest jump for a bourbon drinker. And then after that, everybody's stuck kind of on the rum thing, right? But the problem is that I don't think that rum is a very easy transition for a bourbon drinker. Now, obviously, nothing is going to replace bourbon, but you're going to have categories where, you know, if you have a bourbon drinker that buys 12 bottles a year, 1 bottle a year might be something different than bourbon, right? Maybe 2 bottles a year.
Yeah.
So rum can be good. It can be very good, and it can be very similar to bourbon if it's the right rum. You know, Foursquare in particular comes to mind. Obviously, anything Richard Seal does is fantastic. But I don't think overall it's a very easy transition. I think that apple brandy is the easiest transition that's out there. I also think that apple brandy has a great American history. It was really the first, after rum kind of went out of style, it was really the first American spirit was apple brandy, and that we were making it in our own way from our own varieties, etc. So where we're located in Southern Indiana was actually the apple brandy capital of the world between 1855 and Prohibition. There were 155 active apple brandy distilleries in the 6-county region. It was called the Black Forest of Southern Indiana, Orange, Washington, Lawrence, Crawford, Harrison, and Perry County. And they were making more apple brandy than Northern France at the time, and of a considerable higher quality. So what they were doing was they weren't making apple brandy in the traditional French sort of style. They were very much so making a very big, very bold, very heavy spirit. You can almost think of it as kind of like bourbon's older, sexy sister, I guess would be the best way to say it. So
that's a great way to put it.
Right. There's you know, you go hang out with bourbon, but really, you know,
you're there for the sister.
Yeah, you're there for the sister. Exactly. Yeah. So I think that apple brandy has a lot of commonality with bourbon. And I think as you try this, even at a 2-year-old apple brandy, you'll start to notice some of those similarities. But you'll also start to notice past that vanilla, past those baking spices, you start to get almost a little bit of like baked apple pie or fried apples, more of those traditional Midwestern sort of dishes. And it's just a very nice drink to set down and drink neat, or to throw into a cocktail, or, you know, honestly, one of my favorite ways to drink this, especially in the fall, is to take this and throw it into a mug with some fresh pressed cider and a little sliver of butter and heat it up in the microwave.
Really?
And it is fantastic. And throw a cinnamon stick in there. That is, it's delightful.
Okay, so excuse my ignorance on this, because like I said, I've not gotten into brandy, but is how this doesn't taste like it's artificially flavored.
Nope.
Where does the apple come from? Like, how does the apple get in there?
So the apple is distilled in the same way that the grain would be distilled. So what we do is we're basically taking fresh pressed Michigan apple juice, bringing it in, fermenting it at about 62 degrees, 62 to 67, depending on where we ferment it at, for about 2 weeks, and holding on to all the volatility of that apple that we can. Now, it is a little different from traditional Hoosier apple brandy, Black Forest apple brandy, whatever you want to call it, in that we no longer have the orchards here in Indiana with unique apples to sort of supply things. So we're using modern commercial apples, you know, what you'd be able to get at the grocery store. So flavor profile is going to be a little different than what it was back in the day, but we're slowly building orchards back up. But the whole idea of making a brandy, to me, and the same thing with whiskey, it's the brandy approach is really our approach to everything. It's all about the retention and concentration of flavor. It's the idea of using a pot still, because a pot still is a very inefficient tool of a distiller or an alchemist. So you're distilling almost as much water as you are ethanol. And the beautiful thing about that is that ethanol carries no flavor or aroma whatsoever. The water is what carries the flavor and the aroma over. So those impurities from the water are really where that flavor is coming across during the distillation. And then it's all about making sure that when you put it in the barrel and you put it through the aging regime, through the maturation regime, through a process that in brandy is called élevage, which literally is the same like word that means to raise a child, right, in English, that you hold on to that and you nurture it in such a way that that apple starts to come back to the forefront a little bit. The 2-year-old is a little barrel heavy, which is ironic because it's not been in there very long. As
no,
apple
this
brandy,
is 2 years.
Yep, 2 year. As apple brandy ages a little longer, that apple starts to become more and more forward. So this fall, we'll release our first bottled and bond apple brandy at 4 years old. And that'll have a lot more of that kind of red, delicious sort of apple flavor to it, to the forefront, as opposed to being kind of even kill with the barrel flavor.
It's interesting because I've never gotten into brandy, and I didn't know like necessarily what to expect, because you know, it doesn't like I said, it doesn't come off as like an artificially appley, you know, type of a drink, type of a spirit, because, you know, I think anytime you see something that's apple or a fruit flavor, you think of it being sugary and fake, you know, and like nobody really wants that, not adults anyway. But
well,
like,
and brandy has got such a shit reputation in the US because of that, because it's either artificially flavored and cheap and very sweet, or it's high priced and has no flavor. And there's traditionally not been much in between, short of Hubert Robin and Ossicalis and some of those guys. But in the Midwest, there's really been nothing short of Copper and Kings until recent years that introduces brandy back to people in a way that is legit and authentic, and not artificially flavored, and not made for the 19, 20-year-old whoever's drinking underage stuff, or, whatever that category is, for better or worse. But I think it has a play. It's a big kid's drink for sure. It's not
it's not the Fireball of brandy.
Right. Although you can mix it with Fireball. That's we call that the Hoosier dumpster fire. That's another St. Louis joke.
I wouldn't be allowed back in the house after that.
Right.
Yeah,
right. The proper way to drink that. There is a proper way to drink that. And what you do is you pour a shot of the apple brandy and you pour a shot of the Fireball, and you actually throw the fireball over your shoulder and shoot the apple
Drink the brandy. It makes perfect sense. That way you're drinking the good stuff and getting rid of the shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
All right.
So that one is named after a distillery that was here in southern Indiana, just north of Campbellsburg, Indiana, in what's called Cave River Valley. It wasn't a big distillery. They made about 20,000 gallons a year, roughly, of Hoosier apple brandy, but they were considered the Hoosier apple brandy of the time. So.
Interesting. Now, okay, so this says, like, for example, it says aged in used oak barrels. Is that former bourbon barrels that are used to age this, or what's the used oak barrels that it's aged in?
Yeah, so the fun part for us about apple brandy is that even though it's kind of one of our main pillars, the main pillars being bourbon, brandy, botanical spirits, and American whiskeys,
mm-hmm.
It's not, we don't make a ton of it, and so we can change it up kind of seasonally. So every batch every year will be a little different as far as cooperage goes. So year one was what the winery had used as red wine barrels for a couple years. I had those recharred, retoasted, and then put the brandy in there. And so there is a little bit of sweet red wine influence going on in there, but mostly number two char, medium plus toast. Year two, or the next year, the bottled and bond will be primarily hogshead barrels that were made by Speyside Cooperage. They were actually made by the guy that owns the Guinness Book of World Records for the fastest time putting together a barrel. So those are once used bourbon barrel staves on the side, new American oak heads. And then we have a one-off we'll put out this summer that's an apple brandy that was actually matured completely in previously used French red wine barrels that then went to Mexico and had tequila in them for a year. So you'll get that fresh apple plus that tequila note together.
Interesting.
So,
all right.
Those are very interesting. Yes.
Yeah. I'm starting to see like more bourbons, or it's a bourbon that's finished in tequila, or bourbon finished in absinthe barrels, or things like that. Are you experimenting with that in terms of like the bourbon, just bourbon itself, with using some of those other barrels?
Yeah, we play with that a little bit for one-offs. We'll probably never do like a mainline product like that, but like we did the Unpretentious, which was the High Rye and Port. We just bottled what we call the Honey Barrel, which was a buckwheat bourbon, which is a very alternative mash bill that we aged for 3 years in new American oak, and then it went into a previous Peerless bourbon barrel that was then a Hive and Barrel meadery mead barrel. It's fantastic. We just did a wheat bourbon with some French oak mocha staves that I got from Steve Beam that will be in the gift shop here shortly. I think we've done a Chardonnay barrel, Lee Sinclair, in the past. I've got a few odd beer barrel finish things going on right now that I'm not sure what to do with yet, but they exist. They're there. They exist. So
okay, all right. At least they're there.
Right.
All right. Let's go to the absinthe now, and I'm interested.
Yes.
Are we going Le Bleu first, or are we going to the Fascination Street?
I'd go Le Bleu, and what I would do is I would do, if you've got some water there handy, I would do 3 parts water to 1 part absinthe.
Oh, okay.
And you want that to loosh to almost like a milky white color with just a little clear little stream of absinthe on the top.
Go water first, I'm hoping, because I poured it.
You can do it either way, but typically it's absinthe first, then water. But either way, you can make it work.
We'll switch glasses.
There you go.
Okay. All right. So we got the little cloudiness there. It's a little that licorice, that black licorice is definitely dulled down.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. The absinthe is not as much licorice forward traditionally as what a lot of people tend to think it is. There's a lot of other flavor bridges in there, especially with that one. So the chamomile in particular that we do as a vapor distillation starts to really come to the forefront once you add some water to it. And that tends to be a little more of both a floral and a little bit of an earthy flavor in the loose down thing. Now there are we do have a lot of people who like the absinthe just as a neat shooter. And for those people, I tend to think of them as like, let's advertise this as like Jaeger for pros, I guess.
Adult Jaeger.
Right. Somebody told me one time that a bottle of our absinthe was a 2-serving bottle, and I was like,
no.
I guess you got nothing to do the rest of this week. So
yeah, that's incorrect.
Or you don't want to remember the week.
No. Yeah, things have been going really poorly, and then it's a 2-serving bottle.
No good decisions were made that evening, I'm sure. So.
Zero. So you always. Sorry, go ahead.
No, nothing. I was just gonna. Yeah.
Now, are you always diluting this with water?
That's typically the way that I drink it. That's the traditional way to do it.
No sugar?
I typically don't do sugar, but a lot of people do, and a lot of people prefer it that way. Mm-hmm. I like to be able to get more of that sort of herbaceous botanical thing going on with it. There are a number of other ways to enjoy that one. So throw that in some root beer and make a highball out of it, and it's fantastic.
That's where I get in trouble.
Yep. Or if you want to make a dessert thing out of it, you do a root beer float with it, and it's really good.
Yeah, I can see that.
That would be really good.
Yeah.
The other thing,
it's almost like a less syrupy sambuca.
Yes. Yeah. Very similar. Same family.
But not as syrupy.
Right. Yep. The other thing that you can do with it, and of course, Derby just passed, but it actually, if you take and you split a mint julep between, call it an ounce of bourbon and an ounce of absinthe, is beautiful. It's gorgeous.
Really?
It adds so much to that mint julep with that mint flavor, and then the bourbon, and then having that absinthe come behind that and sort of modify those flavors. I can't believe that that's not a wider spread thing, in all honesty. I mean, people love Sazeracs, and that's, it's another play on that. So
this is super interesting, because like the sambuca or a ouzo or something like that, especially if it's cold, like a after dinner type thing, it gets that syrupy.
Yep.
I don't know. It's not for me, but this is I feel like this could be drank at any time. And the root beer thing's got me really interested.
Yeah, right. And do it with one of the more creamy root beers. So like A&W, Barks is a little too spicy. It's got a little too much bite, as they say. But like A&W works great.
That would be a good one.
Really good. Throw some ice cream in that. I might be in on that.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
I could be convinced of that one.
Well, it's a funny thing. You get all these people that come through, especially in the Midwest with, I don't like black licorice. I don't like black licorice. I won't like absinthe. And then you ask them, do you like root beer? Yeah. Well, there's the same flavor compounds are going on in both.
Yeah.
It's not as extreme. Or in the Midwest, too, Laurelin, I don't know, your family, probably Nick's family, I'm sure, made like macadamia nut cookies. And one of the things they used to do here was use a little bit of anise or anise oil in those macadamia nut cookies. And so all these people are like, I don't like black licorice. You're like, well, did you ever eat your grandma's macadamia nut cookies? Yeah, right. I love those. Well, then you like licorice. You just don't know that you like it yet. You've not experienced it in the right way. So
it tastes like, I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but my wife's family makes cookies like around Christmas time, and it's exactly what this tastes like. It's gonna drive me crazy. They're like flat, like waffly looking cookies. It's exactly what it tastes like. You know what I'm talking about?
I know.
Yeah. Those aren't
Pizzelles.
Yeah, I don't know. That's not a peanut butter cookie, is it?
No, not peanut butter. I think it's the anise, but that's exactly what this tastes like.
Well, and the beautiful thing about that is that across cultures, anise and fennel both, and wormwood, of all three, and that's kind of the holy trinity of absinthe, they've all three been used for like digestive issues. And so you'll see them commonly in teas, you'll see them in cookies, you'll see them in any sort of aperitif or digestif in general. And so there's a wide cultural reference for those particular flavors, just that we've been ruined on it by Mike and Ike's.
Yeah, that's you could definitely go Mike and Ike. That's good.
Right. So, You'll,
and
I think,
I feel like you don't taste as much black licorice as you smell it.
Yes. Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah.
Because when you smell, even out of the bottle,
Mm-hmm.
obviously with the water didn't it definitely dulled it, but you smell straight black licorice on this one. But when you put it in the water, you definitely smell it. Like it's the overwhelming scent, but it doesn't taste like black licorice. I get more of the like I said, that Pitzels, like that cookie, those I think it's the anise. Like it's definitely different than what it smells like, or a very dulled down version of what
Ginger
you smell.
snap.
That could be, yeah, that works too.
Is that the one? I don't know.
But it's good.
That's the fun of playing around with those botanical spirits too, is that you have an opportunity to build. I'm sure there's a name for this, and I don't know the technical term, but I call them flavor bridges. So like this idea that certain flavors modify other flavors in a positive way. And I think the easy example of that is, so people have this idea of what cinnamon tastes like, right? But say, for example, you eat a cinnamon red hot. What you're actually tasting is cinnamon, Ceylon, and cayenne pepper. And if you don't have those three things together, you're not tasting cinnamon.
Sure.
Because it takes those three things to build that up. And you get the same thing with absinthe or gin or any of those botanicals, where one botanical plays off of another. And sometimes it happens in ways that you don't expect, positive or negative. You can lean in a certain direction and get savory, and lean a little bit in the other direction, get sweet, and lean in the wrong direction and get soap. So
I think also, like you said, it's like cinnamon's a prime example, because you could go with a like a red hot to where, you taste a whiskey. Again, that's like, for me, that's like a Fireball, for example. But if you equate that with cinnamon, when you actually taste something that's cinnamon, which is a significantly like less sweet and dulled down version of Fireball or whatever, like you're not thinking cinnamon. So you're not thinking hot or spice because there's no cayenne in there. So yeah, that's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah, we also have this odd thing in the US too, where we name the thing, we call things the wrong thing too. So like when you think cinnamon, for example, as a fun experiment for anybody who's interested in those sort of, wider palate conversations. So when you think cinnamon, you have this idea of, what you go to the store and you buy a stick cinnamon, right? So that is traditional cinnamon as far as what we know it, but that is not the actual traditional cinnamon that you'll taste in like Cinnamon Toast Crunch. That's actually an ingredient called Ceylon, and they're very different from one another. So
that's really interesting.
I didn't know that either.
Yep. They look different too. I mean, they're both barks of trees, but they look entirely different from one another and taste different. So
interesting. All right, last one. Got to get to the Fascination Street.
This is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
This one will get me into trouble too.
Okay. Well, because this is the 120, and I imagine like this neat is probably a bit much. Is it? I'm gonna have to think. Well, so
actually, concentrated. The Blanche that you had is the 120. The Fascination should be 106.
106. Yeah. Sorry. Le Bleu is 120.
Yeah, the Le Bleu, again, a Jaeger for pros.
Yeah, adult Jaeger.
So, yes,
we're not dropping it in Red Bull.
No, right. Well, if that was your thing, I'm not going to judge you. But no,
not for me.
Right. So the Fascination Street, I think you'll like, because this is where, if bourbon and absinthe had a illegitimate love child, this would be the result of that. And the idea here is to bring those absinthe flavors to you in a more mellowed out version, and also bring those bourbon flavors to you in almost an amplified version, again, because those flavor bridges are working together. So, the anise is then pushing the vanilla and the toasted hazelnut and the toasted coconut from the barrel. The goal with this was to make something that was more of like a digestive sort of thing. So you might treat this as almost like an aged sherry or something of that nature, where you're going to have it after a heavy meal and use it to break things down.
Okay.
But I did intend it. That's why I proofed it down to 106 to be drank as a neat drink, or you can throw it on top of ice if you want to. You can louche it, but that barrel actually ate a lot of the oils from the absinthe, and so it doesn't louche as heavily. It's a lot better just a neat, just sipper.
Yeah.
And it's even better in root beer. And honestly, With this one, because it's a little more tamed down, you can throw this in something like Barks Root Beer or Sarsaparilla that has a little more spice to it.
I like this one neat.
There's definitely the wood in that. That nose is way different.
Yes.
Like completely different.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite things that we've done, and I like it because it breaks the rules, right? It goes against everything that traditional absinthe distillers think of as absinthe, and it goes against everything that traditional bourbon distillers think of as bourbon or as American whiskey. And that's what we need in the distilled spirits world as far as craft distillers go. People where we can push the boundaries, but still have it be enjoyable.
Yeah.
Don't be aging in a fish barrel just because you got a fucking fish barrel.
Because you can. Yeah.
Right. Just because you can.
Yeah.
Do stuff that's going to be good that people will enjoy. So
that's a great analogy, by the way. Okay. So when you say, for example, like a new American oak, are you going untoasted, uncharred?
So this is actually the same as what we use for our bourbon. So we use a number 2 char as opposed to a 3 or 4.
Okay.
Little lighter char because the charcoal really doesn't add that much flavor. It's really there as a filtration device for things that you don't want over the years. And then medium plus toast. And the reason for the number 2 char is that number 2 char underneath the char gives you a medium plus toast down to the red layer of the barrel.
Okay.
And that toast is really where you start to get those sugar compounds coming to the forefront. So instead of breaking down cellulose, we're really breaking down lignin, and that lignin gives more of like toasted coconut, toasted hazelnut. To me, a little rounder, I guess, as opposed to just sweet and just straight up in your face, because there's more than enough sweetness in that absinthe or really any of our bourbons as a white spirit to pull through that. The barrel's there to accent it more than it is to overrun it.
I get more of that anise black licorice flavor from this one and less on the nose than I do on the little blue. Yeah.
I agree.
It's different. I mean, but it's still not like Mike and Ike's, it's not like that. Right. It's not to that like artificial level by any means, but I get more of that black licorice in this than I do in the LeBlue, but the LeBlue, the nose is way more licoricey than the Fascination Street.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the other one that you'll have to try sometime, especially if you come by the distillery, is the Right Way, which is we took the Fascination Street barrel and aged I think it was a 3-year-old rye whiskey in it for about 9 months, and so it's just like a Sazerac ready to go.
Interesting. This is very interesting. What's weird is once you said root beer, it's like that line between black licorice and root beer is really blurred. Like it's
real quick.
Really quick. Because as I was saying it, Laurelin's like, yeah, it smells like, I get more of that black licorice, and I'm like, is that black licorice or is it root beer? I can't really tell.
Well, that's another interesting flavor compound too. So everybody, we go with the black licorice thing because that's what people know. That's what the candy's called, etc. But the black licorice is that anise and that fennel. Like if you actually take a piece of licorice root and you chew on it, it's just saccharine. That licorice flavor does not exist in licorice, as it were.
Yeah, that's really good, and I can see this one definitely being different, neat, versus the LeBlue. This is awesome. Yes.
Well, and I feel like that one, the flavors, the licorice is kind of, or what we're calling licorice, is kind of sandwiched between the whiskey. So for me, when it's like I get hit with the licorice and then the whiskey and then the licorice again at the end.
Yeah, and, for sure.
Yeah.
Like right up front, you get hit with it, but it's a little bit less, and then it's whiskey, and then the end. I think it finishes more licorice than like the initial flavor of it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there. So. It's weird. It's so weird though, because like you just don't get that as much on the nose.
Right. And especially like second and third sip, you get a little bit more of that on the end.
I definitely saved a little bit of each one of these, so I didn't go full sample because I think that would be excessive. But yeah, those are quite good.
Especially if you have to work tomorrow.
I don't have to get up till 5:30, so we'll be fine. We can sleep in an hour.
All right.
Fun Monday, sad Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. You guys, I honestly thank you so much. This is awesome, and I really appreciate. I mean, the information, the knowledge about it is just so cool, and I think anybody who listens to this is going to find it so interesting. Like between the names of the drinks and then just hearing how much detail goes into it and the knowledge behind it is awesome. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and come by sometime for sure.
I would love to. I think I told Laurelin before you jumped on here. Most of my family's out in Indiana, and so
nice.
But they're up near Indianapolis. But that'd be worth a trip down south a little ways.
Yeah, we're only 2 hours south of Indy. So
nice.
Yeah.
Social media. Where's a good place for people to find you on social media?
So spirits. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
So spiritsofFrenchLake.com and then stillbox.com for all of our products, and I believe spirithub.com also does some shipping of our products. And then you can find me on Instagram and social media. Just search Alan Bishop. It's either going to be myself, a rock star, and or a rocket scientist, and I'm by far the least successful of the three. And then alchemistcabinet.com.
Okay. All right. Awesome. I'm going to, we'll have to check that seal box because there's a couple of these I might have to get sent out here because these are delicious. So
definitely.
Awesome. You guys, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. This was great.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Definitely. Talk to you guys soon. Take care.
All right. Have a good night.
All righty. Thanks.